Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of February of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates and details, so let's start. But before we start talking about the situation on the ground, of course, let's talk about the report from the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, from Shoigu. He gave us some numbers, some reports about the situation on the ground. And if you remember, a few days ago, the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, reported that Ukrainians, since the beginning of the special military operation, lost just 31,000 soldiers. Everybody was shocked and surprised. Obviously, we can say for sure that Ukrainians still know how to surprise people. But when talking the Russian sources, the Russian numbers, according to Shoigu, the Ukrainians, since the beginning of the special military operation, lost 444,000 soldiers. I am doing my own calculations of the losses, and according to my numbers, by the 27th of February, the Ukrainians lost 440,000 soldiers. So we have the difference with the Minister of Defense, around 4,000 soldiers. Very difficult to understand where I've lost the 4,000 soldiers, but this is the current situation. So the thing is that we have already discussed the real purposes of the Ukrainian losses, of the number that Ukrainians, Zelensky announced and told people. As I told you, the Ukrainians are planning to start demobilization process, and they will demobilize their losses, the real losses on the paper, and they will mobilize and replace them with the fresh forces. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, because we have a lot of very interesting details from Avdiivka direction. And before we start, of course, we'd like to discuss with you the defense belts in this area. According to the sources we have, according to the General Staff and Syrsky, he gave the command to prepare Selidovo for defense and the creation of a fortified area from the city, while the main center of resistance should become Pokrovsk. So according to information we have, currently the Ukrainians on this direction have three defense belts. The first defense belt, once again, goes through from Очеретина to Novobakhmutovka, from Novobakhmutovka to Berdychi, then to Semenovka, from Semenovka to Orlovka, from Orlovka to Yasnobrodovka, from Yasnobrodovka to Karlovka water reservoir. So this is the first defense belt, and this is the defense belt that the Russians are trying to crack right now. According to Syrsky, the second defense belt goes from probably Progress, Zhelane, Novogrudovka, Selidovo, and then to the south to Kurina, and then Kurakhova and Kurakhova reservoir. This is the second defense belt, and currently the Ukrainians are trying to win some time along the first defense belt with the purpose to create fortifications in the second defense belt and the last defense belt on Donetsk direction. We are talking about Pokrovsk, because if Pokrovsk falls down, there is nothing that can stop the Russians to get even Dnipro River and the towns like Zaporozhye and Dnipro. Another important update from the same area we got from the head of Ukrainian army group Tavria. The commander of that group, Tarnavsky, reported that by 27th of February at 6 p.m. of the local time, the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the defense belt along the first defense belt from Очеретина, Berdychi, and further to Karlovka water reservoir. To be more precise, he told us that as a result of, let's say, actions, as a result of maneuvers, the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation in Berdychi, in Orlovka, and in the town by the name of Toninka. And this is very weird and very interesting, because if you follow the Russian sources, they provide us completely different information. So it's like the same story with the losses of Ukrainian army. Zelensky says the loss is 31,000. The Russians are saying the loss is 440,000 soldiers. The same story on the line of combat contact. The Ukrainians reported today for the first time since the fall of Avdiivka, that they managed to stabilize the line Berdychi, Orlovka, Toninka, and the Russians are saying completely different situation. So today I would like to discuss with you and to understand who is lying, who is telling the truth, and who is not telling the truth. And to do this, of course, we need to discuss the geolocations around every single town that the head of Tavria direction reported, Tarnavsky. First, let's talk about Toninka. Before we start, according to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, today they confirmed that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over Severne, this one. The Russians provided some sources from the ground a few days ago about complete control over the settlement, but just today, let's say 1 or 2 days later, the Ministry of Defense confirmed. When talking about Toninka itself, according to the Russians, currently there are very heavy clashes, let's say on the western part of the village and on the northern part of the village. It's when talking about, let's say, Twitter, Telegram, X social network, maybe other social networks, it's just about messages. When talking about real geolocations, we still haven't received even a single confirmation of Russian progress or Russian presence in the western or the northern part of the village. The only geolocation we have today is the video on the southeastern outskirts of the village, so you can see completely opposite direction from the reports and talks and messages we can find today in Telegram channel. On this video, for example, we can see of how the Russians started bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions on the southeastern part of the village. Very likely this video was made a few days ago, maybe yesterday, maybe the day before yesterday. Maybe the Russians managed to bypass this territory after all these artillery strikes. I can't tell you for sure, but when talking once again about geolocations, the Russians managed or probably just started clashes and storming and assaulting of the southeastern part. When talking about Telegram channels and Twitter channels, the Russians are about to finish complete control, establishing complete control over Toninka. So once again, let's move back to the head of Tarnavsky, the head of Tavria group. According to him, they managed to stabilize the situation in the vicinity of Toninka. So once again, according to information we have for now, I'm not sure for 100% that he is correct. Currently, there are very heavy clashes, the Russians are pushing, and maybe the next few days are going to be decisive, and only after a few days we're gonna have enough of information to confirm or to prove or not to prove his information. Furthermore, according to information we have from the Russian sources, currently the Ukrainians concentrated significant number of forces along the tree lines. As you can see, there are not so many buildings, not so many, let's say, villages. There are very small villages like Orlovka, few buildings. There is a village, let's say this one, Yasnobrodovka, just 2 buildings. There is a Berdichi that were already reduced to ruins since the beginning of the clashes for Avdiivka. So there are not so many places where the Ukrainians can collect significant number of forces, and we understand that they need to do this because there are real meat grinder in Orlovka, Toninka and Berdichi, and the Ukrainians always need to have fresh forces and fresh reserves to send them always to replace the wounded and, let's say, lost soldiers. So that's why the Ukrainians took a decision to concentrate their forces along the trenches and the tree lines. And for example, according to some Russian sources, let's say to the west of Severna, to the southwest of Toninka, for example, just in this area, the Ukrainians have concentrated around 2,000 soldiers. So of course, if we will, let's say, make some speculations, we can say, if we calculate the same with the same math, the same logic, the rest of the fields and rest of the tree lines in this area, very likely that there are around 10 and 20,000 soldiers concentrated between fields. So that's why, of course, the Russians see everything. The Russians have already discovered everything, and for example, today we got another video of how the Russians were bombing and attacking those tree lines with cluster rounds, with let's say with SnowStorm tower systems, mainly with cluster rounds. The thing is that the Ukrainians during the Battle of Avdiivka, during the previous period of time, haven't managed to establish and to create the normal fortifications on this direction. So for the Russians it's not a very big deal, and it's a very big problem to attack all these tree lines because they are not prepared for long-term defense. Currently the Ukrainians are trying to prepare fortifications in Selidovo, Pokrovsk, very far from this line, so that's why the Ukrainians have significant losses during the minutes, time, hours they're spending on this direction. Of course, from the other side, we understand that if there is an Ukrainian, obviously in a day or on 2 or 3, he will prepare trenches and he will prepare some fortification, let's say, for that can help them to survive under such a pressure. So we finished with Toninka, and now we are moving to Lastochkina or Orlovka direction. The same commander of Ukrainian group reported that the Russian army storms Orlovka from 3 sides after the withdrawal of the Ukrainian armed forces from Lastochkina group of troops Tavria. The defense forces actually retreated from the village of Lastochkina, which is located immediately to the west of after Avdiivka. There are conditions to difficult terrain. There is such a cascade of small reservoirs, and this qualifies as stabilization of defense of the defense line, a certain leveling of it. So he was saying that it was very difficult to hold Lastishkino, so that's why the Ukrainians during the previous day took a decision to withdraw their positions towards Orlovka, and this is exactly what they did during the previous days. And after that, the Ukrainians took a decision to start or to try to hold this territory as long as possible. So according to the same commander of group, the Ukrainians are storming this territory from 3 directions. So let's take a look at this map. Let's try to let's say, speculate what kind of directions the Russians can use for this attack. Obviously, this might be the first direction of Russian attack. This might be the second direction of Russian attack, the southern, the central, and of course the Russian attack from the north. So according to my understanding, the most, let's say, reasonable and the easiest one in comparison, at least not just the easiest, but the attack that can bring real results in comparison with the southern direction. Why I'm telling this? Because to discuss, let's say, southern approach, we understand that if the Russians haven't managed to establish control over Toninka, and if we take a look at this map, Toninka is not just this small triangle on the southeast in front of, let's say, Severna. Toninka is also a residential area to the northwest, and even if the Russians managed to establish control over this part of Toninka, there is still some residential area with significant number of buildings that located to the south of Orlovka that currently I'm 400% sure under complete Ukrainian control. And if the Russians start offensive operation this way, obviously there are very high chances that they would be attacked by the Ukrainians into their flanks. So for now, when talking about southern direction to attack of Orlovka, I don't see any chances for the Russians to achieve significant results until they fix every issues with Toninka and this village. As soon as they do this, of course, they will have a possibility to continue offensive further. So we can't say that southern direction is something real and something, let's say, that can bring the Russians results. When talking about the central direction, we discussed this in the previous videos. As you can see, the distance, the front the Russians can use for attack is around 600 meters. I'm not sure whether you can imagine this or not, but if you ask my opinion, I can't imagine any attempts to attack along this very short, let's say, corridor to attack Ukrainians between rivers, between water reservoirs. If you ask my opinion, I'm not saying that the Russians are not able to do this. I'm not saying that the Russians will not do this. Maybe the Russians know how to do this and they will do this, but if you ask my opinion, first thing that comes to my mind when I see this area is artillery pocket, trap, mortar pocket, I don't know, let's say, I don't know, meat grinder. Anyway, any of these words can describe the situation if the Russians take a decision to attack Orlovka using the central road. Why I'm telling this, for example, today we got different mappers, different Russian mappers have already updated their maps showing this Russian progress in this direction, but I was very surprised, and most of them made this, let's say, adjustments on their map based on this photo. What can we see on this photo? According to the author of this photo was published on the 25th of February, and to tell the truth, most of the mappers made adjustments on Orlovka direction based on this map, based on this photo. According to the author, he says that on this video we can see destroyed Ukrainian armored vehicles and tanks that were running away from Lastishkina, and the Russians attacked them and covered them with artillery or maybe with FAPs, and this is the situation. From this perspective, this is like something like artillery pocket for the Ukrainians, but as I understand, if the Russians start attacking in the same direction, they will see and they will face the same story. As soon as the Russians enter this artillery pocket, everything will be destroyed, and the Ukrainians don't even need to use, I don't know, let's say, long-range artillery systems, just regular mortars, FPV drones, and everything will be done. So that's why, as I understand, the Russians took a decision to use the northern direction, because when talking about geolocations, we have geolocations just from one direction, from northern, from this area. And during the previous few days, the Russians made lots of attempts to attack the Ukrainians along this line, but most of those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainian forces. So as we discussed, the main purpose and the main goal of the Russians is to establish control over these barracks, to gain a foothold, and then from these positions try to develop attack attack and to, let's say, this foothold will secure the Russian progress and the Russian movements on central direction. So for now, this is like the plan. And so let's talk about geolocations. For example, today the Ukrainian source, the 3rd Azov Brigade, published the video of another Russian attack. On this video, we can see Russian personnel carrier heading towards the Ukrainian trenches and fortifications. This video was geolocated, and at some point the Russian armored personnel carrier got on the minefield and was basically destroyed. You know that once again, most of the mappers, including very famous and very reliable, updated their maps based on this video. To tell the truth, I was surprised. After the vehicle was destroyed, we can see, let's say, probably six Russian soldiers, 6 Russian troopers, stormtroopers, who start running in direction of trenches, and that's it. And this is the end of the video. Of course, maybe we have right to adjust the map based on this video, but when talking about facts on that video, I didn't see the Russians establish control over this entire, let's say network of trenches. Furthermore, if we increase the numbers of updates for a few days, during the previous days, the Russians made few attempts to attack the same tree line, and those attacks took place on the 23rd of February, so basically 4 days ago. There were 2 attempts to attack, and 2 groups were attacking on the southern part, and we have video. You can open the map and saw them. We will not watch the video because those attacks were also repelled by the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians captured, let's say 4 or 5 Russian soldiers. So when talking once again about the report of head of group of army Tavria about the stabilization situation in Orlovka, if you ask my opinion, I believe that by the 27th of February, there are very high chances that the situation in Orlovka is not so critical in comparison, let's say, with the situation in Toninka. So that's why we have even different colors above these territories. Toninka I colored as a gray zone because very likely that maybe the Russians can have some progress. But when talking about Orlovka, I keep this area in the yellow, because according to my understanding of the situation, this territory for now and the complete Ukrainian control. Anyway, the situation can be changed even by the time you start watching this video, let's say in few hours during the premiere. As usually every single day, everything could be changed. So I'm not telling anything. I'm not telling you that it's like as mass situation. I believe that the Russians are able to establish control over Orlovka, but this is not going to be so fast as the Russians managed to establish control over Lastishkina. Obviously, this is going to be a little bit more difficult operation in comparison with this one. Now we are moving to the final, let's say, a final base of Ukrainian stabilization frontline according to Tarnavsky, and we are talking about Berdichi. So what can I tell about this area? First of all, we have 2 geolocations and a few changes on the map. First of all, we got the video of possible Russian attack from the edge positions of Stepova towards Berdichi. On this video, we can see Russian armored vehicle, a fighting machine, was attacking within a very long distance the Ukrainian positions on the edge positions of Berdichi. So at least this video confirms that the Russians are still in Stepova, and they still haven't managed to bypass even the middle line, let's say, point between Berdichi and the Stepova line. But from the other side, today by the end of the video, before I start making this video, we got another geolocation, and here we can see the Russians establish flag on the edge building of Stepova. And this is also very important video. Why is that? Because if you take a look at this soldier, he feels himself very comfortable. He is not in panic. He is relaxed. He is staying with flag for a very long time. If the line of combat contact was very close, obviously he would be attacked by FPV drones, or even by Bradley, or even by yesterday Abrams, but nothing is attacking him. So we can make a conclusion that the line of combat contact is much more further to the west from this position. Maybe kilometer, maybe 500 meters, but obviously further to the west. And this is probably very interesting situation. Another update we have from different mappers. For example, some mappers reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish control over these 2 strongholds. So this is the situation in this area. And if we return back to report of the head of Tavria group, we see that we have some doubts just about one city, one town, and this is Toninka. I have no doubts about Orlovka, at least let's say by 9 p.m. of the local time of of the 27th of February, I have no doubts about Berdichi. At the same time, at 9 p.m. of the local time of the 27th of February, but I have some doubts about Toninka, whether the Ukrainians did manage to dig in deeper and to repel the Russian attacks. Maybe this village was really split in two parts. One of the part is under Russian control, another part is under Ukrainian. Anyway, the situation develops obviously not in Ukrainian favor, and even if the Ukrainians are able to hold this line this night, very unlikely they are not be able to hold this line by the end of this week, or maybe even earlier. Now we're moving further to the south Avdiivka direction, to the south Donetsk direction, to Donetsk, Mariinka, Krasnogorovka, to this territory, the base of, let's say, the second defense belt. And today we continue receiving more updates and details about further Russian progress and attempts to attack the Krasnogorovka. Once again, we haven't received any single geolocated confirmation of additional Russian progress. The only video we have is of how the Russians were bombing and attacking this territory with FABs, and this is the only geolocation we have. And of at least this geolocation confirms that the Russians are using, let's say, very heavy aviation bombs, very heavy weapon to reduce the Ukrainian, let's say, resistance, their pressure, to increase the pressure, and to force the Ukrainians to withdraw their position and to fall back. So this is the only thing that what type of conclusion we can make based on that video. But anyway, obviously there is a progress, but once again I'll repeat my idea that according to my understanding, the main Russian goal is to get the railways for now, to secure the flank, to complete the battle for Georgievka. When talking about Georgievka today, we got additional updates. According to some mappers, the Russians managed to move further along the southern bank of Osikovo water reservoir, and the Russians managed to bypass the water reservoir almost completely and to reach the first buildings in the central part of Georgievka. So this is approximately the progress of the Russian forces according to some mappers and some updates on the ground. So if this information confirmed, this area currently is under Russian control, and this is very important because, as you can see, the Russians by this progress managed to establish control over these trenches, which they can use for concentration of forces, as a small base for further offensive towards Georgievka. Anyway, once again, if this information confirmed, then we can say that the official date of battle for Georgievka is 27th of February, when the Russians reached the first buildings in the residential area, not these dachas, but these real, let's say, Georgievka. Furthermore, during the day, the Russians were bombing and attacking the deep rear positions. The Russians destroyed and attacked ammo depots on the ground, trying to reduce Ukrainian possibilities to supply and support their forces. The Russians destroyed another artillery system somewhere in this area. This is probably crop of armored forces of Ukraine that was discovered and destroyed as a result of hit with Krasnopol. And also another interesting thing from Avdiivka Donetsk direction is that today, as you know, the Ukrainians reported that they managed to shut down another Russian Su-34, but later some Russian sources made analysis, and they reported that today there was a report that the Russians managed to shut down Su-24, not the Russians, but as a result of friendly fire, the Ukrainians shut down their own Su-24, and after that the Ukrainians took a decision to show this loss of their own Su-24 as a result of friendly fire as the loss of Russian, let's say, Su-34. So very complicated situation. Obviously, we can't know for sure who's lying and who's telling the truth. Now we are moving to South Donetsk direction. We haven't received anything neither from Pobeda, Novomykhailovka. The only thing we have is that the Ukrainians are using the same tactics. They try to concentrate their forces and reserves along the tree lines, and the Russians know everything and they attack and bomb. On this video we can see how the Russians were destroying and attacking another supply road that connects Novomykhailovka and the northern fortifications. So this one. This video confirms that the Ukrainians still have control over this stronghold, and from the other side, the video confirms that the Russians probably reached as close as possible to the area. They moved their focus here, and now they're about to start the final offensive operation and to establish control over this territory. Furthermore, we got additional videos from Ugledar itself on this video, and for example, as I see, And this is not the first video during the previous months. During the February, probably the Russians published 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 videos from the same area of how they were bombing and attacking this territory with multi-launch rocket systems, with stealth flamethrower systems, with aviation bombs, which confirms some certain Russian interest in this area, and maybe the Russians are planning to launch another offensive. Who knows? Anyway, soon we're gonna see this. Now we are moving to Bakhmut-Artyomovsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation in direction of Ivanovskaya. Today we got additional geolocations that give us a better understanding of the situation. So as we discussed, there are two tactical directions. First one is Chasiv Yar itself, and the second one is Ivanovskaya. And while the Russians are bombing and attacking Chasiv Yar with a significant number of FABs, because for now they understand that very unlikely they are able to bypass this high-rise building area, there are too many Ukrainian positions. There is a forest behind of these positions. There are lots of trenches, so that's why for now the only thing the Russians can do is to attack the Ukrainians, to bomb them with artillery, with aviation. By the way, on this video, for example, we can see in Ivanovskaya the forest, the bell. So this is, let's say, the polygon, the area of clashes. So the Russians, the only thing they can do is slowly, step by step, to reduce the buildings, and only after that they can start offensive. Meanwhile, while the one Russian group attacked this territory heavily with very powerful, let's say, bombs, the rest of the Russian forces tried to storm Ivanovskaya from the north, from the east, and from the south. Today we got another video of bombing of this, let's say, hill. I'll remind you that this is the hill. This is the hill that Ukrainians can use to control the entire situation in Ivanovskaya. If we return back to this video, maybe here we can see the better picture. Yes, this is the hill. This is it. So this is the Ivanovskaya, and this is the area I'm talking about. And from this small hill, the Ukrainians can control Ivanovskaya. It's like in front of their eyes. So without taking control over this territory, the Russians, it's going to be very difficult for them to continue offensive. So the Russians bombed this territory, and we have some confirmations and some adjustments of the line of combat contact in Ivanovskaya itself. Today, Kamerton Akhmat forces published additional videos of how they were bombing and attacking Ivanovskaya with different types of weapon. Most of the strikes were geolocated by the military summary team, and this video from one side shows us that the Russians continue offensive operation, but from the other side this video shows us approximately the edge Russian and Ukrainian positions and basically the line of combat contact. So if we return back to the map, we geolocated one strike here, another strike here, third strike here, and one strike here. Maybe some of those strikes took place before. It's like compilation of different videos, but more or less we understand that currently the Russians don't have like significant progress in the eastern part, and currently they're waiting when the Russians from the northern part will handle with the Ukrainian fortifications and strongholds in this area, and when the Russians will get as close as possible to Shirokaya Ulitsa. For now, this is the situation on this direction. Furthermore, the Russians established once again full fire control over the main supply roads. Another, let's say, batch of Ukrainian, let's say, forces, reinforcements were destroyed. Also, the Russians continue bombing the western part of Chasiv Yar. They continue hunting the FPV operators' drone bases. So, like, just a regular military routine. When talking about Terny direction, the south and Kupiansk area, this morning we got a significant number of updates that the Russians, as a result of unexpected but very powerful attack, managed to enter and to establish control over the first buildings of the village. After that, I expected that during the day we're going to receive some clarifications and confirmations, but by 9 p.m. of the local time, we still haven't received anything about any Russian further progress. So that's why I can't even tell whether those updates were correct or it was just speculation, with the purpose to force the Ukrainians maybe to panic or something like this. Now we are moving to Zaporozhye area. We got some interesting details. According to information we have, the Russians, according to some sources, managed to establish complete control over Rabotina already, but for some reason neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians provide this information. If you want my opinion, I believe that there are no buildings to hide, and maybe the Ukrainians withdraw their positions towards the northern defense belt, towards the fortifications that located as close as possible to Novodanilovka. And the same story was made by the Russians. They also returned back to the south. Most of the forces currently located along this defense belt, and the only thing both sides can do, if they discover another movement of another group or by, let's say, drones, they start sending like forces, let's say, one to each other, and then there are some short clashes inside of the village. So something like this. For now, there's no updates. Let's let's say, very global to understand what is happening there. And now we are moving further, and important updates are coming from the southern part of Donetsk region. The Russians continue building the railways, and they have almost completed creation of the new railway that in the future will connect the mainland with Zaporozhye and Crimea. So obviously the Russians understand that there are very high chances that sooner or later, anyway, maybe very likely, just likely, I don't know how to compare, what kind of comparison to use, but there are chances that Ukrainians will destroy the Crimean bridge once again, and maybe the destruction can be, let's say, significant and something like this. So that's why the Russians just want to stay on the safe side, and they have almost completed the building of the railway, and as soon as they do this, they can just shut down the bridge, to close the bridge, and without any risks of losing it or something like this. Anyway, they're working on this direction, and when they complete this, will give them significant benefits. Also, the Russians published another video of how they destroyed another air defense system radar somewhere in Nikolaev-Kherson direction as a result of a Ha-35 missile strike. So the Russians continue hunting and suppressing over the Ukrainian air defense system, and this is an ongoing process. When talking about Krynki, another HIMARS strike was published by the Ukrainians, probably 6 or 7 days in a row. I think that it's better to increase the numbers of this since the beginning of months. It will give us the better understanding of number of HIMARS strikes. We can even count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. More than 10 HIMARS strikes took place during the previous months on this direction, and obviously this is not something good, something that is very comfortable for the Russians. Now they need to solve the issue, because by all these HIMARS strikes, the Ukrainians maybe have some plans maybe to do something. So the Russians just want to be on the safe side. And now we are moving to Kiev. We continue receiving significant updates. The Ukrainian, intelligence service reported that the Russians are planning to start the, the revolution in Ukraine, and the third Maidan. And according to Ukrainians, the Russians are planning to start this in June, and everything is let's say estimated, as I see, calculated and scheduled. I think that the Russians are planning during the next 3-4 months make a few, 3, 4, 5 strategical defeats for the Ukrainians, to defeat them in Kharkiv, to defeat them maybe in Odessa, and let's say in the central part of Ukraine or something like this, which will force the civilians to start rising and to start striking. So Putin wants to finish war, this special military operation, maybe not even with capitulation. It's like, it's maybe I don't know how even to call this. Everything in Ukraine started in 2014 with military coup, with Maidan, and probably Putin wants to do the same. He wants to finish the special military operation with Maidan 3, also to make a military coup, to establish his own president, and to take a look what the Western countries are going to say. I'm talking that whether they're going to recognize him or not, because after the military coup in Kiev, Russia recognized Poroshenko and other peoples as the legal authorities of Ukraine. The question is whether the Western countries will recognize the Russia's president that will be established in Kiev after the military coup. And the final topic, if you remember yesterday, the Slovakian Prime Minister reported that the Western countries are planning to send NATO some forces, according to some agreements, to Ukraine. That was reported yesterday, and today most of the countries reported that they're not going to send. For example, Poland is not going to send soldiers to Ukraine. Olaf Scholz is told the same, that neither NATO or European Union are going to send forces. The same report we got from United Kingdom, that the Prime Minister Sunak reports that he is not going to send forces. Italy reported the same, Italy against sending troops to Ukraine, and the same story we got from Spain, and the same story we got from Finland. So after something happens in France with Macron and his meeting about global support in Ukraine, I see that the leaders of Europe are a little bit scared of such powerful words about sending forces to Ukraine. But when talking about strategical agreement that that was signed as, let's say, security agreement with Ukraine that was signed by United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and Canada. Germany refused to send forces, Italy refused to send, United Kingdom refused to send, but France and Canada still haven't reported officially about the fact that they're not going to send forces. I'm not telling anything, but this is very interesting. And the final point is that today Zelensky went to Saudi Arabia and he had a meeting with local authorities, with probably the Crown Prince, and you know that's very difficult to understand what was the purposes of his visit, but according to some force sources, he visited to send a message to Putin, because according to information we have, exactly the Middle East is the center of negotiations between Russia and Western countries, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. So Zelensky visited today and sent a message to Putin, and obviously within the next few days we're going to see and we're going to know the results. But as you can see, Zelensky went to Saudi Arabia after the Western countries yesterday reported about sending troops, and today of course they refused to do this, but what was said, that was said, obviously. Now we'll see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.